Alright guys, I want to kind of expand on part one of the video where we talked about just some of the basic principles that go into individual combat skills and how that translates into small unit tactics. Like I said in the first video, sometimes it's a little easier if you take a 3,000 foot view and you're looking down and get an overarching picture to be able to see how those principles actually translate into an individual combat type scenario. So one of the things that we're going to look at here is we're going to do what's called concentric rings of defense. And this is really a force protection principle. Primarily we use it to do things like secure fobs, really just in general any sort of force protection where I'm securing my particular location. There are certain principles that I want to employ, and those same principles are consistent with individual combat skills as well. So in this particular case, I've got a fob. For you guys who aren't familiar, fob is forward operating base. I've got a little mortar station set here. This is my perimeter, and then from there I've got different ranges set up. I'm going to kind of show my age here a little bit, but if you guys have ever seen the movie Green Berets by John Wayne, I saw that when I was a kid, and great movie. One of the things that happens is as John Wayne and his ODA actually come into their particular fob, they actually look at the fob and they look at the current force protection scenario, and they're seeing that the tree line is actually in pretty close. So first thing they do is they call the engineers in. They're dropping off trackers and they're looking to push that tree line back away from the fob as much as possible. This is the first principle that we look at. It's called visibility and awareness. And we've talked about it a little bit in your personal vulnerability assessment, how critical that is. But visibility and awareness is the primary, it's the foundation of everything that you're doing. From a larger scale perspective, if we're looking at actually securing a location versus an individual, the idea is that if I have an enemy force that's coming, ideally I want to see them long before I could even possibly strike back at them. Now I realize you have things, cruise missiles, you have artillery, you have things that can actually reach out far beyond the naked eye visibility, or even to a certain degree magnification. But I want you to, once again, not focus on the minutia. I want you to get the concept, get the principles from what it is that's going on, and then we'll boil that down into how it translates into individual skills. So ideally I have this force coming in. I want to see them long before they hit my longest range weapon. That way it gives me times to get my forces up online, to get them spun up, and to get them to their particular stations to be able to repel that attacking force. So as this force comes in, I'm gaining visibility. I see them. Once they get inside this long range, okay, we've got long, medium, short, and then inside my perimeter. Once they get inside long range, there's a window there that I can now repel them. That window, the range, the specific number of the range is not really what I'm focusing on. What I really want to focus on is the fact that there are certain assets that I can bring to bear when they are in this range that are not necessarily ideally suited for this range. Like for instance, mortar. If I'm going to have to actually lob mortars into this location, there is a point of diminishing return where if they actually got inside this location, I'm really not comfortable with dropping mortars on myself in order to repel an attacking force. So there is a point at which once that enemy attacker comes in, he is now inside my strike range, but if he continues to come inside, he actually hits an area where that particular asset loses, to a certain degree, some of its effectiveness. So we have mortar fire out to here. We come into this medium range, and let's say now we're going to strike with heavy machine gun fire. All right, heavy machine gun fire, it gives me the ability to strike with a larger volume, but with a lesser degree of accuracy from that of, let's say, individual small arms. However, because of the volume, I can actually put a greater degree of force down on here. And this will all translate into individual skills. I'll show you in a minute. But I can actually put heavy machine gun fire out into this range, but it's out slightly beyond that of, say, my mortar range. My mortar range, I can put very powerful strikes down, but I can't reach the same volume of fire that I can with, let's say, a heavy machine gun. So, once again, I've got power, less volume. Once we come in here, I've got high volume, slightly diminished accuracy. Then once that force gets into short range, now I'm in the individual small arms type realm. So now I'm actually repelling this force with just individual rifles, maybe 249s, whatever the situation calls for. I'm able to actually start repelling these individuals now at a closer range. So that gives me both the increased accuracy and the increased volume. And you can see how as I come into each range, the power of my assets diminish slightly, but the volume and the accuracy increases up until I get inside the perimeter. Now once I get inside the perimeter, now you're hand-to-hand fighting, so on and so forth. And we'll get into how this ties into an individual skill here in just a second. Alright, so how does this translate into individual skills? Individual combat skills are still going to follow the same exact principles using concentric rings of defense. Understand that awareness and visibility is everything. If I get outside of this individual's range, I cannot kick, I cannot punch, I cannot necessarily repel. We're talking about hand-to-hand situations, we're not getting into weapons play. But he is outside of my range. Ideally, he is not a threat to me unless he comes inside that range. So it is better for me to pick up that threat outside of my range than it is inside. However, once I determine that he's a threat and he's continuing to close that distance, the last thing I'm going to do is start throwing elbows. Alright? I want to utilize the assets that are best for the range at which he is sitting. So from here, I can actually engage in kicks, roundhouse kicks, front kicks, things like this. I can actually engage him, and just like the mortar that is actually lobbing rounds, I have a greater degree of power in my kicks than I do in my punches. However, there is no way that I can reach the same volume that I can with my punches. So from kicks, I can actually strike, I can get power from here, and I can be able to keep him at range if I need to. Once he continues to come in, now he's in punch range. So now my volume increases and my accuracy increases slightly as well. So now I'm actually able to rain down a higher degree of both volume and accuracy, but nowhere near that of which if he continues to come in, now I'm throwing knees and elbows. I can actually strike much faster, mixing up my strikes high and low continually from here because I am now inside that short range. So the last thing is once I get beyond short range, we come into what's called that clinch, in which case you guys who have seen UFC, things like this, any sort of MMA fighting, now once I get inside that clinch, now we're inside that perimeter fighting. So understand that when I set up my defensive posture, the first thing starts with awareness out at range. I want to be able to pick up ideally threats that are outside of my strike range long before they get inside my strike range. Once I determine that this is a threat and he is coming in, ideally I'm going to work to be able to start diminishing his ability to attack me. No different than a force that is actually moving from that visible range into long range, into medium, into short. Ideally, if I have 100 men assaulting my fob, I want to be able to degrade that force however much, 20% inside that long range. I degrade them another 20 to 30% when they get into that medium range. I degrade them another 20 to 30% when they get inside that short range. And the purpose of this is I want to be able to degrade that force to a degree that if and when they come into contact with my perimeter, I am no longer fighting 100% of what it started out to be. Ideally, I want to fight nothing. If I can diminish them as they go through various different layers of my defensive posture, if I can degrade their ability to attack me in that range, that's what I want to do. So that by the time they get on my wall, they are on my perimeter, I am now fighting a lesser target. So the same principle applies here. I pick up the threat awareness outside of range. This requires me to pay attention to everything that's going on around me. Once I determine that the threat is there, I am now prepared. My forces are online. I bring my assets to bear. This individual comes inside range. He is now inside my long range, which in this case for individual combat, for unarmed combat, would be my kicks. So I come in with my kicks. I rain down power. I'm looking to diminish. Maybe I'm throwing leg kicks. I'm looking to chop down his legs to reduce his effectiveness to be able to attack me. Once I get inside, or he comes inside, I'm now going to continue to rain punches down on him with a greater degree of accuracy and volume than I could in any way have generated with my kicks. Once we come in even closer, I'm now going to rain down knees and elbows on this individual from short range with a higher degree of accuracy and volume because of the fact that I am working in close proximity. By the time we get to a clinch, I don't want him at full strength anymore. I want him greatly diminished. I want his thighs and his legs beat up from leg kicks. I want his jaw swollen or broken. I want this individual struggling to hang with me by the time I actually get in to clinch him and throw him to the ground. This is the principle that applies to all realms of defense, whether it be individual combat or whether it be force protection. So you guys keep that in mind. We'll go into more depth on specific techniques and things like this, things you can do to draw the guy in. You can actually become the aggressor, but I want you to get the overarching concept first. All right? You guys train hard.